Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'd like to start out with a land acknowledgement. In the Denver metro area, we are on the land of the Ute, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and many other indigenous tribes who still live and travel here. And no matter where you are in Colorado or in the United States, we are occupying indigenous land. With that in mind, let's go forward with our webinar on clean trucks. I want to let you know that Spanish translation is available if you would like it. And you just click the globe there where the red arrow indicates. You'll see an icon like that at the bottom of your screen. Interpretación simultánea al español de la discusión del panel está hace clic en la pequeña globo. All right. I also want to let you know that there's a Q&A box. So if you have questions at any time during the webinar, you can go ahead and put your question there, and we'll be monitoring those for the Q&A part of our presentation. I'd like to welcome everyone who's here on our webinar today. And I'd especially like to thank our co-sponsoring organizations. Today we have Jennifer Helfrich from Ceres and Susan Nadell from E2, who'll be speaking with you later. And my name is Angelique Espinosa. I'm the Director of Policy at Good Business Colorado. I'd also like to let you know sort of what we're talking about today. So transportation is the largest source of air pollution and greenhouse emissions in Colorado. And there are policies under consideration right now that would bring clean trucks to our state. And so we're going to talk today about how the policies would work and what it means for businesses to purchase and operate electric trucks, to reduce business costs, to drive growth and investment in Colorado's clean energy economy, and to help mitigate the toxic and local transportation pollution that negatively impacts people, especially those that live on those major transportation routes, and that also impact our economy. So our panelists today are Patricio Portillo. He is the senior advocate for NRDC, and I had his introduction notes up and I have just lost them for the moment, so I'll come back. We also have Monisha Merchant, Head of Government Affairs for Fluid Truck, and Taz Romine-Mann, co-owner and Fleet and Facilities Supervisor at Namaste Solar. And I wanted to just give you a little rundown of how our agenda will look today. So we'll hear from our panelists, and then I'll ask them a few questions, then we'll open it up for some Q&A. And remember, you can put your questions in the Q&A box. And then we'll hear from Jennifer and Susan about how their national organizations have seen successful business advocacy for clean truck rules. And then I'll tell you a little bit about how you can engage right here in Colorado. So once again, I would like to welcome our panelists. And Susan, could you just pop in the chat and let me know, do we have everybody?
Yes, Patricio's on the call.
Great. So we have Patricio Portillo, who has done a lot of work on this in other states and is here to give us an overview of what these rules are and also to tell us a little bit about his experience. So I'll just introduce each panelist as they start speaking. So Patricio, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Angelique, and thank you for organizing this great webinar. And thank you all for joining today. I really appreciate it. This is a very exciting topic and one that I feel very passionate and strongly about. So I'm happy to chat more with you all about this. What I'm going to show is kind of a lot of information on the medium and heavy duty emission standards that Colorado is currently considering. There's a lot of detail in these slides, and I kind of have to move through them quickly so that we can get through the panel, but we can certainly dive into specific questions, and you should certainly feel free to add them as I'm going over that into the chat or into the Q&A box. But we can definitely get into some of the nitty-gritty details of these rules, maybe in the Q&A section. So with that, next slide, please. So why do we even care about the medium and heavy-duty vehicles? And Angelique, I think teed this up well. Transportation, we know, is the largest source of air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions in Colorado. And what's really critical here is that the medium and heavy-duty vehicles, they just have this outsized impact on emissions. So you can see on the chart on the right, they only make up 9% of all the vehicles that are on Colorado's roads, but they have this sort of outsized impact on greenhouse gas emissions, and then of course NOx and particulate matter, really harmful air pollutants that have a big impact on local air quality and public health. And the reason for this is because the majority of these vehicles are diesel burning. So, diesel, when you combust diesel, you produce a large amount of NOx and particulate matter, and that can have really serious health impacts on respiratory health, cardiovascular health, as well as mental health as well. So next slide, please. So I know we've been saying medium and heavy duty vehicles, but what does that actually mean? This is an extremely diverse segment of vehicles. So it's everything from, your contractor pickup truck, so like the Class 2B vehicles that you can see here on the bottom. So like a minivan, even a step van, all the way up to a cement truck or a dump truck or a big semi truck in the Class 8 category, and sort of everything in between, including school buses, transit buses, utility bucket trucks. So it's extremely diverse segment of vehicles. But I just wanted to put this up to kind of ground us all in, like, what are these, when we say medium and heavy duty, what are we actually talking about? Next slide, please. This is the current makeup of the medium and heavy duty fleet in Colorado. This is based on IHS market data. So that's based on the DMV registration data. This is what the number of Class 2B through Class 8 vehicles look like in the state. And you can see here, to me, the really big takeaway is that the Class 2B and 3 vehicles, they're the bulk of this medium and heavy duty fleet. That's where the majority of these vehicles are at. They make up about 80% of the medium and heavy duty fleet. So that's a huge amount. And it's really crucial for what we're about to discuss, which is electrifying this medium and heavy duty fleet. And it's crucial because the Class 2B through 3 vehicles, we have the technology today to electrify those segments in particular. We have it for all of them, but really for these lighter medium duty vehicles, the technology is here, it's available, and it can meet most of the needs for the Class 2B through 3 category. So it's ripe for electrification. And again, that's the bulk of the vehicles that are on the road for the medium and heavy duty space. So next slide, please. So what is the Advanced Clean Truck Rule? I'm sure you all have heard about this, but just to give a little bit more detail on what it is specifically, it's a manufacturer's sales requirement. It's not a purchase requirement. It's just a requirement that the manufacturers of medium and heavy duty vehicles, and there's about 15 of them in the world, as well as some new entrants that only produce zero emission vehicles. It's a requirement that those manufacturers, those big global companies, have to produce a minimum amount of zero emission vehicles and bring them to the state that adopts the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. Right now we have 6 states that have adopted it. So that means they have a very clear schedule for when these zero emission vehicles have to come to their state. Colorado is considering doing so as well. And again, it just guarantees the minimum supply of zero emission vehicles. It's really, it's like a floor, it's a foundational floor that you can then build upon. It utilizes a credit and deficit system. So, if you, in one year, you're a manufacturer that isn't quite able to produce enough zero emission vehicles, you can go out into the market and purchase credits from a competitor, from another manufacturer that was able to produce those zero emission vehicles and over comply with their requirement for that year, and they can use those credits to meet their own compliance requirements. So it provides this sort of flexibility, allowing the manufacturers to actually meet the requirement. The other component of the Advanced Clean Truck Rule is a fleet reporting requirement. And that's really to just collect more information and data on all of these vehicle operations that are occurring in the state. It's a really diverse market, and there's a lot of different ways these vehicles are being driven. And there's not a lot of transparency or knowledge on how they are actually being utilized. And it's incredibly valuable to collect this information the state can then utilize it to develop targeted incentive programs to hit some of those harder to electrify segments of the medium and heavy duty space. It can be used for the utilities to help them plan for infrastructure build out. So it's a really important piece, and it's one that often gets overlooked because it's not like the big sexy zero emission vehicle piece of this rule, but it's crucial to getting to helping set future policies for the state. Next slide, please. And this is the Advanced Clean Truck Rule credit requirement by model year. So this is what the schedule would look like if you're a manufacturer of medium and heavy duty vehicles. And as you can see, it's kind of broken apart in 3 different categories. So class 2B through 3, class 4 through 8, and class 7 and 8 tractors. And those gradually increase over time. The chart on the graph on the right is just another depiction of what this looks like. And I kind of pointed out when the start dates would be depending on the year of adoption, because there is a federal requirement to give the manufacturers 2-year lead time. So if the rule was adopted this year, the first year would come into effect is model year 2026. You can see the schedule here for the number of zero emission vehicles that would be required to be sold as a manufacturer. And then of course, if it was adopted next year, the first year would be model year 2027. Next slide, please. The other rule is the heavy duty omnibus rule. So the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, that's like our long-term vision. That's where we want to get to with zero emission vehicles. But in the near term, we need to reduce emissions from all of those new diesel trucks that continue to be sold. And the heavy duty omnibus rule, what it does is it puts a new NOx standard and testing procedures on new diesel engines. So it decreases the amount of NOx that these new vehicles can emit by about 90% when it's fully implemented in 2027. And you can see that on the right-hand side. It also has some particulate matter requirements just to prevent backsliding, and it has additional useful life and manufacturer emissions warranty provisions to better reflect how long these vehicles are actually staying on our roads. And I think that's it for me, so I'll pass it back to Angelique.
Thank you so much, Patricio. That was a lot in a short period of time. So I'm glad we have a Q&A section. And I just wanted to flesh out your introduction a little bit, Patricio. So Patricio, he holds a master's degree, so everyone else, so that you know. Patricio holds a master's in international affairs from Johns Hopkins School of International Studies with a concentration in energy and environment policy, and a Bachelor of Business Administration in international economics from Temple University. So he knows his stuff. And prior to working at the NRDC, he worked closely with state policymakers at the National Governors Association and was a Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute Fellow, serving on the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. And now he works on clean transportation policies to minimize transportation's environmental impact and explore solutions to address historical inequities and encourage economic growth. So next we'll hear from Monisha Merchant. She is the head of government affairs at Fluid Truck. And Fluid Truck is a Denver-based high growth technology and logistics platform that leverages innovative mobile technology to offer convenient truck rentals for businesses and fleets. The leadership team is committed to increasing the access of zero emission medium duty vehicles through its platform, with current demonstration projects in the New York metro area and in Santa Monica. Monisha, tell us more.
Great. Thanks, Angelique. Kelly, can you advance the slide, please? So yes, thank you all for attending, and thanks to the organizing team for having Fluid Truck featured on this event. We are a Denver, Colorado headquartered company focused on providing, the trucks and vans that you need when you need it and where you need it, and trying to help small businesses and fleet operators scale without having the fleet management or overhead and additional capital outlay. Next slide. So we have our app, our telematics, and a fleet management service, so we can help both the vehicle owner as well as any of the delivery drivers or others who need the vehicle for their businesses to really manage the delivery process and get you the right size truck or van for your actual work need. And so we make it really easy on the app if you're just trying to do it once in a while. We have telematics so that if you have a fleet of drivers that you need to be tracking, and then we also do all of the fleet management for the vehicles if customers want us to do that. Next slide. So this is just a highlight of how our app works. For our vehicles, you actually do, when you make a reservation, you're reserving the actual vehicle you need. We've heard from customers that having that predictability of making sure that you get a 10-foot truck versus a 15-foot truck or a cargo van when you need it is really important. You look to see what's available at what time and what location. And you can usually find in most of our markets the vehicle that's available near where you are, because we actually don't have physical locations. And then you using the telematics system and your phone, you can both unlock the vehicle as well as return it, pretty quickly, take photos, upload them, and then return the vehicle. Next slide. So here's an example of the types of vehicles that we have on our platform. We are focused on the medium duty space. Right now, they are traditional ICE vehicles as the bulk of them, because that's what's available, but we're pretty much fuel or technology agnostic on our platform. So as more electric vehicles for these medium duty become available, our leadership team is very committed to making sure that we are able to get as many of these electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles out and available to as many people as possible. Next slide. And so, yeah, so, as we expand and as the fleets, as Angelique mentioned in the intro, we do have electric vehicle pilots going on in Santa Monica in the zero emission delivery zone, and then New York, New Jersey, working with IKEA and the TaskRabbiters. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Monisha. So now we'll hear from Taz Romine-Mann, and he is a co-owner and fleet facility supervisor at Namaste Solar here in Colorado. He has a background in engineering and more than 8 years of experience in transportation, logistics, and asset management. And he brings process and value-driven approach to problem solving. His major projects include simultaneously locating, acquiring, designing, and managing the build-out of 2 new office warehouses, and reimagining Namaste's solar fleet of install vehicles, envisioning, driving, and planning an Art and Soul, and planning also Art and Soul, which is a community cultural celebration of the Sun Valley neighborhood in Denver, Colorado. So some professional work and some community work, and it's a delight to have you here. Taz, tell us more.
Thank you, Angelique. Appreciate the opportunity to speak here, and excited to see how many folks have tuned in to listen to this webinar. The other panelists have covered a lot of ground, I think, so far already, but speaking as a construction company in Colorado, this is a highly commoditized market where we are very vulnerable to the price fluctuations in our supply chain. And so looking, currently the vulnerability and the volatility of the fuel market, I think is a major motivating factor for why a transition to electric vehicles or zero emission vehicles, more efficient vehicles, makes a ton of sense for companies that are at our scale who are not capable of self-fulfilling their own fuel prices. We go to a gas station to buy diesel or gasoline, so we're subject to the same retail market prices that other companies are. And if you looked at similar companies to our size, which probably make up the majority of companies within our field in the state, they're suffering from those same problems and those same challenges. So the transition to EVs not only allows us to benefit the environment, as I think Patricio has kind of described, through reducing our environmental impact, but it also helps stabilize our our expenses year over year. And that stability is something that allows us to make plans for the future. Whereas right now we're looking at, you know, gasoline dollars that are shooting up towards $4 and higher for the foreseeable future. And we know that fuel prices take the elevator up and take the stairs down, as they say. So when those costs come down and when we can kind of normalize again, who knows when that's going to happen. And so that stability is a major driver. Additionally, performance reliability, Colorado, we have winters, we have difficult road conditions, we have long springs where we get a lot of snow. And you know, looking at Manisha's slide, all-wheel drive, front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, all of those factors play a huge role in vehicle performance in inclement weather conditions and when road conditions are poor. And EVs often are all-wheel drive standard and have much more sophisticated traction control systems that increase safety and performance in those road conditions that we deal with very frequently. And so there's a cost basis for us wanting to do this. There's a safety and performance benefit for not only our employees, but also other vehicles on the road. We're carrying heavy goods, lots of material, lots of weight. We want to make sure that we're transporting that as safely as we can, and EVs represent a significant improvement in our ability to do that. Additionally, where the energy is coming from, I think is for Namaste Solar at least vitally important, right? We are a solar energy company. We believe in the power of renewable energy in the future of our economy and our world. And that transition to EV also allows like that upstream value chain to become more just healthier for our world and for our environment. And that's something that we are deeply invested in helping to advance. Now, the challenge has always been that as a small company, our access to capital, as well as our ability to place large amounts of orders, is very limited. And when you look at the current market, there are companies like Amazon, Postal Service, FedEx that are investing in EVs, and that leaves all of the companies that are, you know, our size or around our size way at the back of the line in terms of getting access to that production capacity. And so these new rules help provide that opportunity for us to be able to get our foot in the door and access those vehicles in a way that keeps us competitive with these larger multi-state, national, international companies that are otherwise kind of swallowing up all this capacity. And they're able to access these savings. They're able to access these benefits from security and safety, as well as environmentally and kind of their brand image. And we want to be able to take part of those things as well. And this rule is a great way to help us do that.
Great. Thanks so much. So I'm going to ask some questions to the whole panel, and I'd say just jump in if you think that this question really appeals to you or you have a great answer. So first of all, I'd like to ask about smaller companies who need better access to electric trucks and vans. How will the clean truck rules increase investment opportunities for all sizes of businesses, including those smaller businesses, given the high upfront costs that we see now?
Double muted. Wow, 2 years in, still doing this. I can start and then others feel free to jump in here. But so really what this rule does, it just guarantees that there will be models available for sale in the state. And it really puts the onus on the manufacturers to actually sell those vehicles. So they're going to need to competitively price them or develop financial tools to actually get them into fleets. So they're going to be working very closely with the fleets and the utilities as well, who will have to support on the infrastructure side. But again, this is just sort of like, this is your base, this is your foundation. And there are other complementary policies that are certainly needed as well to help target specific types of fleets, specific sizes of fleets, where infrastructure dollars can go the furthest, or infrastructure and incentive dollars can go the furthest, that sort of thing. So there are other complementary policies that we want to utilize and build off of this. But because it has that schedule, which I showed with the two different charts, because it has this like fixed certainty schedule, it provides a lot of certainty to the market. It allows the utilities to begin going and making investments today, saying, hey, we know that we're going to have this minimum number of ZETs coming, so we can begin planning for that and building up the grid upgrades that are required in order to service those vehicles. It can also help unlock other private sector participants who, otherwise it's a very dynamic and uncertain market right now. There's a lot happening, to say the least. And there's a lot happening in this space in particular. And it kind of just provides that year-on-year certainty that really will help unlock additional sort of complementary investments into this space.
Great. Taz or Manisha, do you have thoughts about affordability?
Yeah, I think that's where, Fluid Truck feels like we can help with that initially, as companies are trying to explore how to integrate electric vehicles in their fleet, or for small businesses who may not necessarily invest in, multiple vehicles, but want to be able to communicate to their customers that they are, they have a very zero emissions kind of system where they can, rent from Fluid. We can also help manufacturers, demonstrate how their technology works. So people, when they borrow from us for a short period of time, instead of it just being like a 15-minute test drive at the dealer, they can actually use it in their day-to-day operations, see how it works, how it matches with what their needs are for however they need to use the vehicles. And so that's where we're excited from that perspective to provide that affordable on-ramp, for smaller fleets or individual small businesses. And then, the total cost of ownership does involve the charging infrastructure. So whether, as the policies, as Patricio was mentioning, that the utilities would, have a little bit more certainty with that there's going to be an increased demand, we need some more publicly accessible chargers, similar to what we've seen with passenger vehicles, but for these medium and heavy duty vehicles, so that the drivers and the users have some certainty on how they're going to do the, charging in the middle of the day, because sometimes the routes could be potentially longer than just a single charge.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay if I jump in to add on to that? Because I think Manish brought up an interesting point, which is around the cost of ownership and the upfront expense of acquisition. But I think it's also worth considering the benefit in terms of the ROI, right? Is that uptime, downtime, maintenance costs, fueling time, those are all things that negatively impact your ability to be on site and or performing work, whatever is generating revenue for your business. And that it's a combination of charging infrastructure and these vehicles, right? Because if you can charge vehicles overnight, that refueling activity no longer eats into your operational time. EVs are significantly fewer parts than an ICE engine, an ICE vehicle. So there's fewer maintenance requirements for those vehicles. So your expected downtime, your scheduled downtime is going to be lessened as well. So the upfront cost is not insignificant, but if you're comparing, some of what we've seen in terms of cargo vans, I'm in quotes in this year. I think Patricio kind of mentioned the market is wild right now, and I can verify that is absolutely the case as a person trying to acquire vehicles for my company. If I was looking at those costs, they're not necessarily incomparable to what you could get an electric vehicle for. Now, and then you throw on incentives and you start talking about additional benefits, and then it's ROI. I think we're really getting close to kind of a parity situation, especially if fuel costs don't change in the near term. So all these things are kind of adding up together, where like the benefits of companies are going to be left behind if they don't transition to EVs, because the cost of keeping your internal combustion engine vehicles are going to start to outstrip in every way that upfront cost perspective. And taking a longer term vision to how these vehicles are going to impact your business, I think is the only one that you can afford to use right now.
Wow, powerful. Monisha, you mentioned charging infrastructure. And so that was my next question, actually, for anyone who'd like to answer. When will we see an electric charging infrastructure in place that is going to support the needs of businesses? And will federal funding help?
Patricio, do you want to start? And then
Yeah, I'm happy to start on this. So what's interesting, kind of going back to what I was showing before, the Class 2B through 3 vehicles being the bulk of the medium and heavy duty fleet in Colorado, those vehicles can all utilize the exact same types of charging technology that the light passenger vehicles can utilize. So that's level 2 DC fast charging. So it's not like we're talking about some entirely new technology that needs to be deployed. It's not like wireless charging or something like that. And that actually goes for the Class 2B all the way up to the Class 5. They can utilize that same sort of passenger vehicle charging network. Now, the charging pattern will be different, certainly, because the operation of these vehicles is very different. They need to be running all day. However, for many of the fleets, they come back to like a private depot at night, and that's kind of what I think Taz was alluding to. Is like overnight, you have them sitting in a lot for 8 hours. That's a perfect time for them to charge, and it's also a perfect time to do it from a cost perspective, since electricity prices at night are significantly lower. But again, we got to get the utilities and the fleets and the manufacturers kind of working all together to get that right. Otherwise, it's going to be sort of a hodgepodge of how fleets go forward. So that means, when I say getting it right, it means making sure that the infrastructure is in place before the vehicles even come there, because you could put an order in and you can get the vehicle delivered, but if your infrastructure is not there, you're not going to be able to use it. And it also means getting the rates right so that it is actually favorable to charge it overnight or something like that, or in the middle of the day when there's a lot of solar on the grid, or something along those lines. But it just requires that additional level of coordination that I think is new. But again, having that certainty, that fixed schedule, really helps bring the different stakeholders together into the table to work through some of those challenges.
Yeah, and I would add that while the technology is there for the passenger vehicles, the way that they set up the parking space right now in those retail centers, you can't fit, our medium duty vehicles. And so that's something that I've talked with a lot of different utilities across the country about, is, as we're thinking about various types of the incentives, there is the model where there's the depot overnight, but there's just also need for some level of mesh as well, depending on how some of those fleets may be designed in terms of making sure that the vehicle may go to multiple points before it returns back to a main site, or at least that's what we're seeing, and especially in our New York, New Jersey model. So I think you're spot on, Patricio, in terms of making sure that there's all this coordination. I think we just have to look at these models and make sure that the infrastructure and the funding and incentives are flexible enough so that we don't have so many private chargers that are behind a gate, but that there's enough out there, the way that people feel comfortable going to any gas station to be able to refuel.
It's Namas Solar, at both of our current facilities, we have EV chargers that we installed using the RAQC grant program that are available to the public. And it was a really successful program for us to work with, and a great partnership. And what's interesting when we talk about the sizing of those spaces in those retail centers is it makes me think about when like interstate transit systems started becoming more like that transportation network was built. Tractor trailers became a thing. We have truck stops now, right, that are built, that are sized to service those vehicles. When you compare that to a typical kind of corner gas station, that it's not going to work. And so how can we apply lessons learned about how we manage logistics of fuel delivery for these different sectors of transportation? I think is what kind of part of what I'm hearing as well is it's, there's the funding, and we got to make sure we have the money and the logistics and the land and the space to do those things. But also we have 100 years of using vehicles that need to be refueled, that are different sizes, and how are we learning those lessons of how to make those spaces work for all of those things?
Yeah, and Loves and Travel America, I think, have entered into some partnerships, right, to try to provide charging infrastructure at those right-sized truck stops, right, as well. So that'll be good to see. But it's interesting if we think about everybody who has like a charger at home, right, for their for their passenger vehicle, or and then they're not using it, or as we think about making more and more chargers accessible to more people, I think just because the limitations are there too in terms of how many we can have at the end of the day. So
fascinating. All right, and then finally, how do our current supply chain challenges impact the rollout and adoption of clean trucks? Ooh, I stumped you.
say profoundly is what I would say. Again, coming from the perspective of trying to acquire vehicles right now, it's an incredible scenario that we find ourselves in. We have orders that are lingering in kind of a limbo status with the manufacturer that were placed in November, where we don't know, they haven't been canceled, but they haven't been scheduled for production yet. So we don't know if those vehicles are going to arrive. And that makes just planning, even for the next month, incredibly difficult. And so if we're looking at a transition to EVs or zero emission vehicles, I think it's been described, it's more than just the vehicle itself that's necessary for those things. So if you're going to do that, you also need to spend the time identifying and developing or connecting with that infrastructure that's going to support your operation of those vehicles. And right now, if you don't know that you can get them, it's really hard to commit to making that additional investment into finding those resources that are going to support that utilization. And so it's a yes and scenario for me, where if I get scheduled delivery dates for vehicles and I have that visibility, that additional investment becomes much more easy to make do. But if you don't, you make that investment and then you're stuck with another year of paying who knows what for gas and fuel and all these additional things. You're kind of doubling down on the pain of that investment potentially.
Agree.
Any other comments on supply chain? Does anyone have a crystal ball to tell us when supply chain issues are going to loosen up?
I wish. I guess I would just add that, that's a challenge across like vehicle, like it's diesel internal combustion engine vehicles are also experiencing that challenge. I know there are a lot of private sector investments to help solve this problem. There's also a lot of federal coordination on it as well. I guess I would just note it's worth like drawing your attention to the fact that like there is this 2-year lead time requirement on the advanced clean truck rule. So, if the state were to adopt it this year, it wouldn't come into effect until model year 2026, and if it was next year, model year 2027. So, if we're still feeling like this supply chain crunch like as acutely in 2 years, I think we're going to have some much bigger problems. And hopefully, I guess maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I'm hopeful that in that time we can kind of work through some of these pain points or pressure points that we have right now in our supply chain, and come up with solutions around it.
And if I can build on, that's a really important point. And I think that the way that this rule can help with these supply chain issues is in helping to guarantee that availability of product to my company, other companies in the state that are looking to access these vehicles, and providing that kind of a little bit of reassurance that this investment is going to be one that we're going to be able to make use of without kind of subjecting ourselves to those additional downfalls of like what's happening right now, where I place an order for a vehicle and I don't know if I'm going to get it or not. So yeah, I want to make sure that distinction kind of gets noted, that I think the 2-year outlook with this rule is very different than the 2-year outlook without it.
Yeah. Okay, well, we have time now for our Q&A, and I see that Susan has been reminding folks that there's a place to ask your burning questions. Maybe your business has a particular challenge with electric vehicles that hasn't been mentioned so far. That would be a great thing for us to talk about. And maybe you have a particular interest in what financing options might be available. I'm just encouraging you to go ahead and ask your burning questions now. Of course, I do have a couple of backup questions lined up just in case. So I will go to those. Well, Patricio, I think you probably already answered my first question, which would be for you, which is how will the rule make it more affordable for small businesses to purchase or lease an electric truck? So I'm going to ask a follow-up question on that one. What do you think will be the impact of delaying a rulemaking from this year to next year? How is that going to impact this affordability question?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, and I should have said this in the initial response, but for a lot of like the really small fleets, like the independent owner and operators, maybe they have 1 or 2 vehicles. Many of them they're not buying a new vehicle. They're buying a used vehicle. So they are sort of waiting for these vehicles for that first purchaser to use the zero emission vehicle and then pass it on into the used truck market. So obviously that will delay them in getting it because it just, the time that it will take for that first fleet to use it as long as they need to, and then for it to then be sold onto the used truck market. So it will just kind of slow that process. The other thing that I should note is that, the advanced clean truck rule, it's a gradual ramp up. It starts very low on the requirements and increases slowly over time. The heavy duty omnibus rule, that's a requirement that, by a certain date, all of these new diesel trucks that get sold into the state, and there's tens of thousands of them, have to be lower emitting and also have to have these extended useful life and warranty provisions for the manufacturer, which has a real benefit to the fleets that are going to be purchasing them, since the parts breaking will be covered for a longer period of time by the manufacturer, and it creates this incentive for the manufacturer who has the ability to design more durable parts to actually do so from the beginning, rather than down the road you're paying higher in operation and maintenance costs. So that's going to be tens of thousands of new diesel trucks that get brought to the state every single year, and those will have that additional sort of warranty provision in them. And of course, that will trickle down again into the used vehicle market as well, with that extended warranty also attached to it. So it's something that it just, every year that you kind of wait, you're delaying that this market from really picking up a lot of these vehicles that are very beneficial to fleets potentially.
And does that play in at all into the availability of federal funds that we've seen over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. So like a lot of the federal funds, they are done on a competitive grant basis. So if you have, you're going to have to compete with other fleets from all over the country. And in applying for those dollars, making the case to show that you have these favorable programs in your state already to help aid with adoption is probably going to make you a more competitive candidate for that grant. Now, of course, each grant is going to be different, and what those requirements actually look like will be different. But of course, being able to point to the fact that yes, you can actually get these vehicles in your state. Yes, your utility has already got infrastructure incentive dollars in place, or something along those lines as well, that kind of builds off of these rules. It will be helpful for you to make your case for why your fleet and your purchase is best suited for grant dollars.
Interesting. I'd like to ask Monisha and Taz, if you could tell us, since you both have businesses, what is the biggest obstacle to your business purchasing or using or leasing or engaging with electric vehicles? And what do you think is the single most important thing that needs to happen to solve or get over that obstacle?
I can go first. I think that I don't think there's a single solution or a single problem, right? Like there's we have the broader automobile industry in general, supply chain challenges. And so, the number of vehicles that are available, new vehicles that are available from a zero emissions perspective is there's just a limit in terms of what's out there. And then, as Taz mentioned before, if you don't know when you're getting if you can't really predict when you're going to have those electric vehicles in your fleet, putting in the investment for the infrastructure is harder too. So it's there's just a number of, in a traditional project management scenario, you could go in and say, okay, I expect to receive, this vehicle on X date, and it's going to take me this many months in advance to set up the infrastructure. But it's just hard to predict, and there's so much uncertainty in terms of when you're going to get that. You can get the charging infrastructure set up, but that may be too early from a cost and revenue perspective.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing certainty. Certainty would help a lot.
Yeah.
Great.
And if I can, I think choice. In these various classes, there's, we buy a 3,500 van that lists, 27 EPA mileage. We know we're not going to get that when we put 3,000 pounds in the back of it or whatever our payload is. And so when we're looking at these new EVs that are listed with certain ranges, I don't think there's not quite the contextual understanding of what does that equate to in real world terms in terms of range. Because with EV, your range is critically important to have a really solid understanding of, because you can't just grab a gas can, and go buy some fuel and refill on the side of the road. You're going to have a much more difficult time recovering that vehicle from that position. So I think there's both choice in the market in terms of at different levels of classification of vehicles for 2B, 3, et cetera. Like, what are the options there in terms of make, model, capability, but also having this really firm understanding of what range means when we start talking about payload capacity and operating distance. I think for us a critical component.
Mm-hmm.
And Angelique, I think Frank Bruno had, put in the Q&A section about municipal vehicles, right? And municipal for transit, school buses, and larger vehicles, but on the passenger side too, that, there's similar kind of challenges with supply chain. And so it's, I think we're all competing for the same parts.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And that brings up an interesting point about, I think, what are the kinds of businesses that could take advantage of an electric vehicle? I hadn't really thought about Via Mobility Services, which is a nonprofit that provides mobility services for disabled folks and older folks and so on. And obviously they have a lot of vehicles. That's a big fleet. But then there's also, your florist or your landscaper who might only need a truck or two, a brewer, microbrewer, who delivers, kegs around. What are some of the applications that you all have seen for electric vehicles in the smaller business market or the nonprofit market?
Yeah, I think goods movement is the key of what, our customers are all involved in. And so you brought up the florist, we saw that, a lot of florists have like maybe one vehicle dedicated, but then in February and May, those big holidays, they need 10. So they're not going to keep 10. And so we see them, rent from us for that. And, we have one of my favorite businesses is in Southern California, and she has a yerba mate tea shop, and she wants to, make sure that she's environmental as possible, like end to end. And so can't wait to be able to get access because she does, she needs to bring her beverages to events and, for catering and things like that. And so, being able to incorporate using an electric vehicle as a way of just showing to all of her customers that, she's also being consistent with her corporate values.
That's great.
If I can just add one other example, there's the transit agency actually in California, Antelope Valley Transit Agency. They're a small to medium-sized transit agency, and they are now entirely electric. So all of their buses are fully electric, which I think they're the first fully electric transit agency in the country, and maybe North America as well. But they did it, in a small suburban market. They did it while expanding the number of lines that they're offering as well, which is really impressive. And they did it because of the big cost savings that they were seeing with their buses, because, a lot of that short haul, like the stop and go driving, is really well suited for electrification today. And that's essentially what their routes were. So it made sense for them, and they were able to make that happen over the course, I think, of 4 or 5 years. It took some time, but very impressive to see this kind of smaller fleet, taking that big step forward and being fully electric.
Great. We are at the end of Q&A. I want to save some time for Susan and Jenny to talk about how they've seen in their national organizations business contribute to getting these rules passed. So I'm going to turn it over to first Jennifer Helfrich, who's the Senior Manager at State Policy West for Ceres.
Great. Thanks, Angelique. Appreciate it. And thanks to our panelists for a great conversation. Next slide, please. And so you all just learned about the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, and I wanted to let you know that Ceres has been coordinating with companies, institutions, and investors who support the rule across states. So we have a letter, and Kelly's going to drop a link to that letter and a link to sign on to the letter into the chat right now. And these are all the folks who joined that letter. So these folks have been very important in helping the 6 states that have adopted the rule to do so. And that's because, as you could see from the conversation, the company voice can be really valuable in this conversation. The state policy leaders often hear from industry who maybe are not as supportive of the rule. So those of you who do like the idea of having increased access to clean truck models within the state, they often don't hear your voice. And this letter is one format that we've used to help bring that voice to policymakers. Next slide, please. So we know that 6 states have adopted, and now that covers 1 in 5 states. So with a few more states adopting, we're looking at having the whole medium and heavy duty truck market be impacted by this rule, which will make costs drop even further and more trucks available, and those cost savings even easier to unlock. I wanted to share one quick example of why your voice can be valuable. In New Jersey, they had gone through the administrative process for the adoption of the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, but the governor's office was sitting on the rule. They were a few days away from the deadline for sending it to the registrar. So we reached out to them and we brought some of our supportive companies to come meet with them, Nestle, Siemens, and IKEA. And from the questions that we heard, our understanding was that they were hearing from opposition, folks who didn't think the rule was a good idea, were dragging their feet. So the fact that they were able to hear from companies directly who supported the rule was a huge value to them. They were taking notes like anything. And the next day, they sent the rule to the registrar, which implies that hearing directly from companies who supported the rule kind of helped them make their decision to finalize it. So your voice can be the make or break on whether this policy happens in Colorado. Next slide, please. Just to share a few more examples of folks who support, in part because I know that for some of you, you may have never engaged on policy advocacy in the state before, especially for something like this. And I want to show you that you'd be in good company. Pun intended, both with national companies and also with some of your peers who really are based in the state, who support the rule and see this as a way to increase their access to clean trucks as a cost-saving opportunity, because it's good for the climate and because it's good for their communities. And I think the next slide is actually my colleague, Susan. Susan, are you ready?
I sure am. Thank you. That's really very important kind of framing on how important the business voice is to passing these types of policies. For those who don't know E2, we're a national nonpartisan group of business leaders, and we care about policy that is good for the economy and good for the environment. We've been around for 21 years. We have 9 chapters across the country, and the Mountain West chapter, which I lead, started 15 years ago. And we have about 10,000 members and supporters across the country, many in clean energy, but others in real estate, investing, restaurants, and other sectors. And we bring those voices to state and federal legislators and policies like this, where they tell their stories about the economic benefits of smart climate and clean energy policies. And as we've heard today, business leaders have an outside voice with their advocacy. Next slide, please. One thing that E2 does is published reports on the economic benefits of the clean energy economy. And for the ACT, we developed this state-specific analysis. We did this for Colorado. We did it for all the other states that ACT has been considered. And this is to frame the economic opportunity for policymakers and the public. Next slide, please. These are some of the economic benefits that will come to Colorado when we pass the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. We've leveraged our members' voices through action alert sign-on letters, verbal testimony during rulemakings, communications directly to key policymakers. And because of the breadth of the E2 members and supporters, we've been able to leverage our members who work at the electric, medium, and heavy-duty manufacturers and charging infrastructure companies to also advocate for these rules. Following our success in helping to pass ACT in California and Massachusetts and New York and New Jersey and Oregon and Washington, like you've heard, E2 is advancing efforts now in Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, North Carolina to ensure the ACT is adopted as soon as possible. And Patricio did mention some follow-on rules. So in California, E2 is working on the next frontier of zero-emission truck policy, which is the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule, which would require certain medium heavy-duty fleets to completely transition to zero-emission trucks and buses over the next 20 years. When the ACT is focused on, while the ACT is focused on manufacturers and drives clean truck supply, the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule is focused on fleet owners and operators and drives clean truck demand. So I would like to give this back to you, Angelique, to talk about the specific opportunities here in Colorado.
Angelique, you're on mute.
You'd think I would know that by now. Okay. The place to do this is going to be at the AQCC, which is the Air Quality Control Commission. That's a group of volunteer commissioners appointed by the governor, and they hold hearings on air quality rules and decide whether or not to adopt them. Governor Polis considers when he should direct them to initiate this rulemaking process. And we have mentioned that the timeline, next slide, please, has been delayed from the original statement. So originally it was meant to be heard this year so that we would have that rule done this year. And then the administration announced a bit of a delay that, or at least it was delayed to what we expected, which would push it out until next year. Next slide. So what would be really great is for businesses who are interested in moving this forward and getting access to those trucks sooner to do a few things. And here on this slide, you'll see what you can do. The biggest upcoming opportunity is there is a testimony available on the larger clean truck strategy draft, and that will be March 30th and 31st. They'll be taking public comment for which you can write or you can actually speak. And we would be happy to help you do either of those things. And you'll see there's some other options that you can do as well. The sign-on letter was mentioned before. And next slide. I just want to close by saying thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions at all, or you would like some assistance in knowing how to raise your voice, please contact any one of us and we'll be happy to support you in that. And of course, you can use, you can go to Series, or the Good Business Colorado, or the E2 websites to find out more about our organizations. And just a note, all of the links that you saw here will be in the follow-up email, so you don't have to try to jot them all down now. Thank you to our co-sponsors, sponsoring organizations. Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you to our excellent translator, Abigail. And most of all, thank you to all of you who are committed to being great businesses. Thank you.